Holy moly, you know how a lot of times people have different timelines depending on like what you engage with on Twitter, if you're on Twitter or whatnot. I honestly believe that every person's timeline has to be like mine, where it is just non-stop posts about Luigi Mangione. Of course, what I've noticed with the mainstream coverage of this entire case, when the CEO was first murdered, all of the coverage was about him being a saint, about this being a cold-blooded murder, not offering any context, any analysis as to the fact that the CEO of the largest healthcare company in this country was murdered. That may have something to do with the fact that a lot of people have been screwed over by the scam for-profit health insurance industry. So, that was how they initially covered it. And then once Luigi Mangione, also that name is just so Italian, Luigi Mangione, once Luigi's mansion was arrested and more has come out about him, the coverage has largely been, this was a disturbed young man. This was a man who was clearly in the throes of a mental health episode. This was a sick individual. I don't know if you guys saw earlier that Ken Klippenstein was the one who finally released the entire manifesto, because even though all of these outlets had the manifesto, they were only reading parts from it and they refused to release the entire thing. And so Kenny Clips, because he doesn't have to wait for anybody to give him clearance on what he writes about, release the entire thing. Pop Crave tweeted the manifesto and tagged Ken Klippenstein. Ken has officially made it into the Pop Crave sphere. Of course, the mainstream media is trying to turn this into an issue that simply pertains to one individual being mentally ill, having had some sort of mental health breakdown, which, here's the thing, okay? The reason that they do that is because they don't want to have to address with seriousness the statements that Luigi made in the manifesto that was found on his person. It discredits his ideological motive. It discredits him point blank talking about the greed of the healthcare industry and of CEOs like Brian Thompson, who he and that's why he murdered him. It is to make this out to be a young man who had simply lost his mind, who was very, very sick. There's no bigger issue at play here. The issue is that this young man who was mentally ill murdered somebody and is now most likely going to go to prison for it. Read the manifesto that the media refused to publish. I've obtained a copy of suspected killers Luigi Mangione's manifesto, the real one, not the forgery circulating online. Major media outlets are also in possession of the document but have refused to publish it and not even articulated a reason why. My queries to the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and NBC to explain their rationale for withholding the manifesto, while gladly quoting from it selectively, have not been answered. I'll have more to say on this later, on how unhealthy the media's drift away from public disclosure is, but for now, here is the manifesto. To the feds. I will keep this short because I do respect what you do for our country. Do you think the feds wrote this? Do you think the FBI wrote this? And they're like, you know what? Let's start off with talking about how great we are. Just kidding. To save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial. Some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, a lot of patience. The spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. My tech is pretty locked down because I work in engineering, so probably not much info there. I do apologize for any strife of traumas, but it had to be done. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. A reminder that the U.S. has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in... Okay, so these are facts here. A reminder, the U.S. has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly number 42 in life expectancy. United is the indecipherable largest company in the U.S. by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, Walmart. It has grown and grown, but as our life expectancy... No, the reality is these indecipherable have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, the problem is more complex, but I do not have the space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument. But many have illuminated the corruption and the greed, e.g. Rosenthal and more, and what he is referencing here is Michael Moore's documentary Sicko that he released in 2007. And this documentary looks at America's healthcare crisis and why so many people in this country do not have coverage. That is, has Michael Moore said anything? I don't know if he's released a statement yet, but Sicko is 17 years old. Yeah, Michael Moore's been doing this a long time. Decades ago, and the problems simply remain. It is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. Evidently, I am the first to face it with such brutal honesty. Clearly, something happened in the last, I think it's like 6 months, where people in Luigi's life had reported that he kind of fell off the face of the planet. I think it was more recently that his family had become more concerned because they hadn't heard from him because he had gone dark. What we know is that he had been in regular contact with friends and family until about 6 months ago, when he suddenly just stopped communicating with people. He'd also suffered from a painful back injury that was very clearly a huge part of his last year here, and most likely is a contributing factor to his radicalization. This back injury that he then subsequently got surgery for was extremely debilitating. This is a guy who came from a very privileged upbringing, but also was most likely, like the rest of us, dealing with a very predatory healthcare system. It is potentially the reason that he has ended up here. Yes, Rosenthal, referencing Elizabeth Rosenthal's book American Sickness. Yeah, and then there were a number of like things on his Goodreads lists that point to a guy who had been radicalized against the endless greed of the healthcare industry. Like, that is how fucked up the healthcare industry is, that even a guy like him, who went to private school, who comes from a wealthy family, who is on paper somebody who you think would have like become, you know, maybe become a CEO himself, and instead ended up shooting one on the streets of Manhattan.
When a McDonald's customer told an employee that she spotted him after that 5-day nationwide search.
I'm not about to get into like conspiracy theories here and saying anything as fact, but it does seem kind of crazy that a McDonald's employee in Pennsylvania recognized Luigi from the photos that were released. And the other part of this is that he had all of this, if it is true that he had all, you know, that he was the killer and he was found at this McDonald's and he had all this evidence on him. I ain't no big city detective or lawyer, but that to me is somebody who is not trying to not get caught, is what I will say. Like, I think that that is a fair assessment.
While many offer condolences to Thompson's loved ones, his killing sparked outrage over the state of healthcare in America. Some turned to social media to share their experiences with health insurance companies.
A witness who was at the McDonald's where Luigi Mangione was caught says he and a friend joked at Mangione that he looked like the New York shooter.
I didn't really see a whole lot. I mean, a group of us are here every day, and one of my friends...
Every day? What do you mean a group of us are here every day?
And I thought he was kidding.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm amending it. My old roommate's parents would go to McDonald's every day and get those giant styrofoam cups with a Diet Coke. And then for the rest of the day, they would have a 12-pack of Diet Coke at home that then they would refill these styrofoam cups all day long. I went to high school in Iowa. I have simply forgotten I am a West Coast elite. I expressed my surprise that a group goes every day, but now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, that shit was going on in my town.
He made
Your friend's parents are the reason
comment.
we don't have an ozone layer. Mm-hmm.
Well, that looks like the shooter from New York. But I thought he was... the group of us, I thought it was more of a joke. And we were kidding about it. But then, as it turned out, it was him. And like I said,
I'm so confused. So you're joking around that he looks like the shooter from New York. But how do we get to the point that the police are actually called and they catch him?
employee that thought it was him that, I guess, started the initial like investigation on it. That's pretty much about it. I mean, he ordered, went to the rear of the store and sat. I passed him whenever I left.
Wait, what was this?
Went to the rear of the store and sat. I passed him whenever I left. I left.
What is that slow fade out? What is happening? Did you see the employee might not get the reward money? The jokes write themselves. The jokes write themselves. I cannot say anything that is a better joke than the joke writing itself. All jokes aside, I think that Luigi was very clearly at a point in his life, he was willing to act upon his radicalization against corporate greed and a system that just puts profit over people and has destroyed a lot of people's lives. Like, here's the thing. There's a lot of people who believe that, but few who are willing to like go to the point that they plan out and then execute the murder of a healthcare CEO. And so it is very likely that he didn't expect to remain at large for as long as he did. And maybe it was you try to get in the mindset of somebody like that. And I don't think that is somebody who goes, and then I'll just go back to my job, right? 6 months prior to this, he had dropped communication with friends and family. So I'm sure there will be more that comes out as they are investigating what took place in these 6 months. Of course, a lot of the framing is going to be that he was just this sick guy who had a mental breakdown. And it's not to say that he wasn't having mental, that he wasn't struggling mentally, of course, like with his back injury and what an impediment that was to him living his life. I would never say that that was not a point, but there's a different framing of that that's being done in the media where they're trying to turn this into like, oh, this has nothing to do with the healthcare industry, right? This has nothing to do with like, there's no facts here because this is just a guy who is mentally ill, that he's just insane. It's sad he was suffering so much and the only coping he could find was to do this. Yeah, I mean, it is very sad. Like, it is very, very sad. Even before we found out the identity of the alleged shooter, because who knows, this could be the FBI just cooking all this shit up. Okay, whatever. But before we found out Luigi Mangione's name, what a lot of people had said was, ultimately, this isn't even about like, people were trying to figure out, why did this guy do this? He goes, well, it seems, actually pretty obvious, because how common is it that a CEO is just gunned down because someone decided to murder a CEO that day, right? For no reason whatsoever. The big picture was not that a CEO had been murdered, but that so many people's response to that across an ideological spectrum, from MAGA, Daily Wire watching Ben Shapiro fans, to card-carrying communists, leftists, to people in the middle, to like just everyday folks who aren't even terminally online. A lot of people were united largely in their reaction to this being, well, the healthcare industry is fucking evil. And Brian Thompson is symbolic of that industry, and he made a lot of money off of my pain, off my family's pain, off my neighbor's pain. And to them, that murder being symbolic of an industry that has cost so many people their quality of life. What was sad, even before the identity was revealed, was that we live in a country where somebody, no matter who their identity was, no matter what their political affiliation was, no matter like anything about that person, had gotten to a point where they murder a CEO at 7 a.m. in Manhattan, and the response is heavily that of indifference or, deserved. Like, how that resonated with people, how people united around not the condemnation of the shooter, but the condemnation of the industry. And to me, that is what has always been the story. And it's why, like, right now people are doing the thing where they're trying so hard to put Luigi Mansion into a box. And there are people who are like purity testing him, which is so crazy. Like, what are we even fucking doing here? And it's like, at the end of the day, this was a person who had a terrible experience, terrible health experience, obviously had been dealing with the industry, and reached a point that he felt this was the only logical endpoint.